Sorry about that. When the first thing that you say when you get up is "whoops," you know there could be a problem. Okay. I'd like to do something just a little tad bit different today, but what I'd like to share with you today is probably not so much a teaching as it is a testimonial. And actually, I'd like to, since this is Mother's Day, I'd like to share with you a couple of things about my mother. I haven't really been prone to talk much about my mother in messages, so this is really more of a testimonial. But and I'd like to just share with you one thing that she taught me and one thing that I discovered about her. So, are we okay here, Nathan? Oh, good. Okay. Okay. The my mother, when I was a kid, very young, I don't know that my mother was actually a Christian. Now, she did. My mother and father did go to church and took me to church as I was growing up. We went to a congregational church, actually, that was just on the same street that we lived on. It wasn't any farther from our house than that little Harp's convenience store across the road over here. It was about that distance. So we walked to church every Sunday, and we went every week. But as back in those days, back in the early 50s, there were a lot of people who went to church who may not necessarily have been Christians, just because it was more of a socially accepted and kind of expected thing to do, that people just went to church. And so I can't really guarantee you what my mother's spiritual condition was, whether she was genuinely a believer in Jesus. But back in those days, in those times, Christianity was more the backdrop of the culture, I would say, than it is really today in the times we're living in right now. So, at any rate, one of the things that my mother did do when I was just a small child, she taught me a prayer to pray at night. And some of you may have also been taught this prayer by a parent, I don't know, or you may have learned it growing up. You can probably anticipate what I'm going to say here. But the prayer was beginning when I was 3 years old. She would come with me as I was going to bed, and she would actually, she taught me the prayer. It's the little 4-line prayer. You remember this one? Now I lay me, right, down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake. Some people have sanitized that these days. They don't like to say that line, but it was, if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Most of you have heard that and memorized it, or maybe said it some. But she would have me, I would learn that. I mean, it's the 4 lines and it rhymes, so it's pretty easy to learn even when you're 3. And I remember saying that every night. And then after concluding those 4 lines, ask God to bless people, starting with nuclear family and kind of working your way out to other folks that you knew. So that was our little nightly routine. And I don't know that I thought that much about it at the time. It just was what you knew as you were growing up and in those early years. As I thought about it later, as I grew up and became an adult, I'll have to confess that that's not really a prayer that I taught my own kids to pray when they were young. Somehow I didn't feel that was what I wanted to teach them as they were going. But that was what I learned when I was just a kid, and I learned it. And again, it was a nice rhyme, so I'd learned it pretty well. But one of the things when you think about that prayer, it's not necessarily a bad prayer. It's when you start, it just has 4 lines, and the first line is a statement of fact. Now I lay me down to sleep, you're going to bed. So that's a statement right there. The second line is, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. That's actually a scriptural thought, and one that you can actually count on God to honor, because actually in Psalm 121, it says in the Bible, the Lord is thy keeper. He is the keeper. He is your keeper, and he's my keeper. And we may not always be able to count on our brother to be our keeper. There's certainly some evidence that doesn't always work out to the best, but we can count on God to be our keeper. The Lord is my keeper. The next line is one that introduces an element of the unknown in there. If I should die before I wake, is something that we don't really know about. We don't know the future and what's going to happen even when we certainly don't know what's going to happen when we're asleep. So there's an element of the unknown in there. But then the last line, I pray the Lord my soul to take, is certainly one that we can have some confidence about, because if God is our keeper, certainly if the time has come for us to transition out from this life, he's going to take us. So it seems like it's a kind of a solid thing from that. But at any rate, and I'm sorry that I don't see Adam here this morning, but I was just going to say one of the things that happened when I was in my life, when I was just the summer that I turned 5, there was a night I remember going to bed and I'd prayed, and I was just lying in bed there trying to go to sleep. And when I was a kid, I don't know if others of you can relate to this, but we were poor. We didn't have a whole lot. I lived in Kansas City, which is, of course, it's north from here and it's cooler, but it's not. The summer's still hot there, and we didn't have air conditioning in our house. In fact, I don't remember knowing anybody that had air conditioning in their house, probably until I was in high school. So we we didn't have a whole lot. We were sort of like I remember my father-in-law used to always say we were, and I could identify with this as a kid. We were so poor we couldn't pay attention. So, but but at any rate, by my bed where I slept in the little bedroom at the back of the house, there was a window right beside. The bed was this way, and there was the wall right. It was right along the wall, and there was a big window right there. And so I'd have the window open to try to get some air in the summertime. And I remember lying there in bed, and I'd said the prayer for the night, and was just thinking. And I may have been thinking about that prayer. I don't really know what I was thinking about, but suddenly I began to think, what could I remember? And again, when you're 4 or 5 years old, you can only remember back to when you were maybe 2 or 3. Some memories, because memories don't really go back much before when you had words, when you could verbalize and speak them. It's pretty hard to remember much before that. So I could remember back to that point, but I couldn't remember anything before that. I was trying to remember something before that, and there wasn't. It was just there was a blank out there before that. And so I became, there was a real awareness that I was a conscious being, separate from other people, and that I had some kind of a beginning that I couldn't remember before the beginning. There's nothing before that I could think of or remember. So you just can start wherever you're conscious of a memory. And so I remembered being conscious of those early memories, and I realized at that point that I was on a what you might call a timeline. On a timeline. And somehow maybe that thought of that prayer was in there. If I should die before I wake, there was awareness that at some point I was going to die. And I didn't know when that was. And obviously, since that was my prayer every night, it was obvious that there was a constant thought that it could happen at just any time. Right? And it could. The reality is there's not one of us that really knows what tomorrow holds, or even the rest of today, right? We don't know that. So there was that thought that I'm on a timeline, and I'm going to die sometime, and I don't really know when that is, and I don't really know what's going to be on the other side of that. At that age, I didn't really know that. I was just, again, pretty young. And I found that to be what happened for me. The experience of that was that I felt a very great fear. A fear, and it was a fear. The fear was there was a sense that I was trapped, if you will, in time, moving along with no idea of how far I would go. But at some point there was an end to that, and that was all that I would know. And that created in me a really strong fear. Probably it was a fear of lack of control. But I think it was a fear of the unknown. It was also, I believe, a fear of God, because I understood that I had a creator. I'd been praying every night, so I understood there was a God, but I didn't really know what that meant or what he was like, except that I understood that I was a created being on a timeline. And I didn't really set the timeline, and I have no way to control when I move off that timeline. And that caused me to have a real sense of fear. And I really believe Adam, in the class or the meetings that we've had on Sunday evenings, the spirituality meetings, talked about the spiritual journey that we're all on. I think that was, for me, the beginning of a spiritual journey. Really was with a realization of the fear of God, the fear of God, in the sense of being trapped in this whole situation that we're all in, every one of us here. And it's interesting, much later, when I was probably 40 years old or so, I remember one day thinking, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these, a cartoon or something that shows a picture of a businessman in an office and sitting at a desk, and behind him there's a frame, and in the frame is not a picture, but a frame is a little saying, and the saying is, "Time is money." Ever seen that or heard of that? So, time is money. I remember one day I got to thinking about that, strangely enough, and if you think about it, you can say 3 plus 1 equals 2 plus 2, or you can turn it around and say 2 plus 2 equals 3 plus 1, and it's the same thing, right? That's there's a name for that in mathematics, but I don't remember what that was, but you can reverse them and it's still the same. Nothing has changed. So I got to thinking about that. If time is money, is it true also to say money is time? And no, that's actually not true. Money is not time. I think we can all agree on that. So I got to thinking about, well, what is time really? It's not money. What is it? I didn't know how to find the answer to that exactly. I realized there are dictionaries, but I thought, well, I'm going to go back to see what's God's definition of time, and I didn't know exactly if I could figure that out. But I went back to the Bible and looked in the Strong's Concordance, first places in the Old Testament where the word of time is used, and looked it up in the Hebrew, what the word for time is. And you know what it means in Hebrew? The word that's translated time in our Bibles is a word that means to advance. To advance. Actually, if that makes some sense, if you think about it, because really, time is always advancing. It's always advancing. It's going forward. And where's Christina? Oh, there's Christina back in the back. Christina had a party yesterday for graduation. Just a delightful gathering together of people, and that was a wonderful time. And she can look back on that and remember that. But no matter how much she might want to, she can't bring that day back again. She can't go back and do that again. It's gone. I mean, it's there in your memory, but it's not one that you can't go back and live in the past. I mean, you can think about it or remember it, but you can't live in it again. Time is always advancing. It's moving forward. And if you think about it, where's the little, did I leave the little thing over here? Where's that little, maybe I left it back there. I'm sorry, I left the little, there it is. Can you move that forward one, Caleb? That's okay. You can move it for me if you want to. Oh, okay. Well, sorry about this. I forgot to take the technology with me. But this is what the Bible says about you and me. What is your life? Who knows what you do tomorrow? What is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. That's what we are. That's exactly what we are. So, and it's interesting. When I was 4 or 5 years old and having an experience lying in my bed that night, I certainly had no idea that this vapor would still be here this long. You don't know about these things exactly how much time that you have, but that's really what it amounts to. That the time is continuing to move on, and so just in recent years, as I've thought back to that prayer that my mother taught me, it reminds me of the fact that really it began for me a sense of the fear of God. And it's interesting, in the Bible, in Psalm, well, let's go back one. Can we slip back? Well, I don't know if this is going to work quite right. I can't really make it go backwards. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, it says in Psalm 111, verse 10. And I don't seem to have that one there, but if you take Proverbs chapter 2, verses 3 through 5, it says, if you cry after knowledge and lift up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver and searchest for her as for hid treasures, then shall you understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. The fear of the Lord, it says in the Bible over and over, Proverbs 9, verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. Beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And fools despise wisdom and instruction, it says. I guess I can look at it here. So, you see this repeatedly, and I've always kind of wondered about this. This is where knowledge or wisdom actually begin. It doesn't say that the fear of God is the end of knowledge. It says it's the beginning. It doesn't say it's the end of wisdom. It says it's the beginning. It's where you start from. And it's not. And it's kind of where you have to continue some too. If you look over in Ecclesiastes, at the end of Ecclesiastes, he says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter: fear God and keep His commandments. For this is the whole duty of man." So there's that strong component, and actually, as I think about this, even though there may have been some ways in which my mother wasn't a very spiritual woman, I'm appreciative of the fact that she taught me something that led me to this, to the fear of God, because that's really where things have to start. And it's interesting that I think a lot of times people don't like to talk about that much today. They really don't. It's and the reason is probably because we say, well, somebody will say, well, God is love, isn't He? Well, yes, that's true. It says in the Bible, in the New Testament, God is love. No question about that. It says God is light. Yes, God is light. It says that in the Bible also, that He's light. He's the source of all knowledge and understanding, and in Him is no darkness. It says that Jesus, in fact, Himself said God is a spirit, right? Those who worship Him in spirit and truth. Yes, that's true also. We know those things are absolutely true. They really are. But there's another aspect of God that we sometimes neglect or forget, or maybe don't want to think about as much, and that is this one. Hebrews 12:29, for our God is a consuming fire. That's a quote actually from Deuteronomy. It's in both Testaments. It's repeated in the Bible. There's the consuming part of the fire. If you want to think of it this way, it's kind of like the three young men who went into the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they went into a consuming fire, and actually all that got consumed were the bonds that were holding them back. So it's not God's intent is not your destruction or my destruction. That's not what He's looking forward to, or what His purpose is in our lives. But it is but our God still nevertheless is a consuming fire, and for us that means that I think things begin with that fear of the Lord. And so the point of all that is to say this. That if you're a mother and you have an opportunity with little ones, we see there's a number of young children here today, but all of us were young children at some point, that mothers have a tremendous influence on the lives of their children. The things that you teach a child from when they're just very young have an impact on them that goes for years and years, and many times for their whole lives. And it's just something to think about, because there's a value in what you teach them. There's a value in what you teach them, and I found that was true for my mother as well. One other thing, a second thing I wanted to share with you, and this is something that I discovered or learned about my mother, and I'll have to before I mention this. Say one other thing, and that is that essentially that that I found as I was growing up, and particularly as I grew up and became an adult, there were times that I had some conflicts with my mother. Now, I know that may be hard for you to believe, but it's just, it's true. There were times when I had, she was maybe a little overprotective from my standpoint, and I may have pushed back at that. And so there were times that I had conflict. Maybe nobody else in here ever had any conflict with their mother, but I did. And I'm gonna. I guess this is a time for confessions, good for the soul, right, Nathan? So, but I'll mention to you that when I became an adult, young adult in my 20s, there were times because I had been born again and I had gone to a Christian college and was involved in church and all that, and in the course of that, I happened to come into contact with some just really wonderful, godly, spiritual women. And people the age of, I'm talking about women the age of my mother, and I will confess to you that as I was a young adult, there were times when I was envious of some other people that I knew because their mothers seemed to be so much more godly and spiritual than my mother was. Now, nobody else may have done that, but I confess that I did. That wasn't right. It wasn't a good thing, but it was something that was real for me at that point, that I did that. And so when I was about 30 years old, not quite 31 actually, end of June, I get a call one Friday from my mother. She had gone into a hospital for some kind of procedure. I forget what it was, but she'd gone in for a procedure, and she called me on a Friday afternoon to tell me that she'd been diagnosed with cancer. And so that was on a Friday, and so I made arrangements with Donna. We had 3 small children, but I made arrangements to drive up to Kansas City to go see her in the hospital that next day, and drove up there and met with the doctor that was working with her or had seen her. My sister and I met with the doctor, and what the doctor told us was that he'd seen the evidence of the cancer, and what he said was that, and they would do some chemotherapy and different stuff, but he said she had 6 to 9 months to live. That's what he told us. Well, that was quite a shock. Just out of the blue, I had no idea that she had anything like that, and 6 to 9 months. And it ended up that she actually lived 7.5 months from the time that he said that. So he was really right on the money with his prediction of the timing there. But that caused some changes in our lives at that point, obviously, as it does. And so again, we had 3 small children. I had a full-time job, so every other weekend I would drive up to Kansas City and spend time with her and then come back, and we'd have conversations on the phone in between times, of course. But and so one day, about 2 or 3 months later, as we were going through this experience together, one day God, I felt as I was praying for her, or I don't know if I was praying for her at that moment, but one day God spoke to my heart. And what he spoke to my heart was that my mother was exactly the right mother for me. And also he communicated to me that he wanted me to share that with her. So the next time I was on the phone with her, the day or the next day, whichever day it was, when I was talking with her, I shared just that thought with her, and I didn't make it out as though it was some great big spiritual thing that God spoke to me or whatever. But I just told her that I really appreciated her, and that I really realized that she was just exactly the right mother for me. And it's interesting when God shows you something, then you know that it's really true. And you know, sometimes kids, and I've heard my own kids say this, you know, about their mother or about me. You know, you're the best dad in the world, or you're the best mom in the world. And kids will say that sometimes, but it's really not about the best of this or the best of that in the world, really. What I know about my mother is that she was just the right mother for me and for my sister. She wasn't the right mother for any of you. You had all of you guys, all of you folks had a different mother, and than I did. But she was the right one for me, and so I told her that. And I don't really know because it was on the phone, and you can't really see people's reactions totally on the phone. I don't know exactly what impact that had on her, but I knew it was something that was true. I knew because it really God impressed it on me, and I knew that I needed to say it. And it was really I don't know. It was a revelation, especially when you've come from a point of view that you really thought there were some other people that would be better mothers than yours, but it doesn't even matter if they were better mothers, because what matters is that you had the one that was exactly the right one for you. And so that was an important thought for me. I don't know where that hits any of you. Some of you have mothers who've passed away, and so they've gone on, and you can think about that, and perhaps in your relations with them. Some of you have mothers who are still here, and some of you may have mothers that are right here in our midst, and that's a good thing too. All I can suggest to you and share with you is that wherever your mother is, or if she's not here anymore, if she's gone from this life, wherever she is, she's just been exactly the right mother for you. Doesn't mean she was perfect or did everything just right or always had the best motives or anything. It doesn't mean any of those things, but it means that she was still, in spite of all whatever there may be, that she was exactly the right motive, or the right mother for you. And it's a good thing if you believe that to be true. If you agree with me, and if you believe that to be true, it's a good thing if you share that with her. What I'd say is, share that with her while she's still here, because then you won't have a chance to do that later. So that's important. It's important because we don't know about those things, but what we do know is this: not one of you in this room chose your mother. I'm confident of that. And if you are a mother, not one of you chose your children. You didn't. I mean, you may have. You're glad to have them, of course, but you didn't really choose them. That was God's plan. He's the one that put that together. And here's the good news about God is He's a lot smarter than we are. And these days, of course, there's a lot of people that call that into question, because now that they've got artificial intelligence and augmented reality and all these kinds of things that you can do with computers, there's people that really think they can be as smart as God or smarter than He could ever think of being. But I'll show you something else just to think about, because God has a plan for you and for me, and it's a good plan. But I'll tell you what, over in Matthew, it says, "Are not two sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall to the ground without your Father." And then verse 30, it says, "But the very hairs of your head are all numbered." And I'd like you just to think about that for just 1 second. Most everybody in here has hair on their head. and there's Jesus said, this is Jesus talking, however many hairs you got, God knows exactly how many there are, and He's got a number for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's got them all numbered. He knows exactly how many there are. But think of this: every day, that was probably pretty easy for Him when there was just Adam and Eve and maybe a few kids. But now they say, and I don't know how they know this exactly, but they say there's 7 billion or more people on the planet, something like that. I don't know how many. Hard to keep up with, right? I can't even count that high, so I don't worry about it too much. But they say there's more than 7 billion people. And so people being born and people dying every day. All these little ones, they're still they've got hairs that are just growing on their heads, right? They're getting new hairs. Maybe not every single day, but they're getting new hairs. And some of us who have reached certain points in life, we have hair that starts falling out, and it's gradually. Some of us it falls out faster than others, but it's falling out. So think about this: every day. There's a number. It's not just every day, it's every minute, every second. This is a constantly changing number of how many hairs there are on every head of 7 billion plus people. And God knows what that number is. And I don't know how smart your artificial intelligence is, but I don't think they've figured out how to figure that just yet. How many hairs on everybody's heads, that's a constantly changing number. Constantly. He knows that. He's got a plan. He's got a plan for you, and he's got a plan for me, and it incorporates your mother. And if you are a mother, it incorporates your children. And there's those relationships are relationships that he's planned. Every relationship isn't perfect maybe, but it's still a relationship that he's planned for a reason. And a reason in your life is to draw you to him. It's always about drawing you to him. His purpose for every one of us is to come to repentance in some way. And I believe many times he uses mothers to do that. So that's really my testimony and my message for you today. If Jerry, Jerry will be back in the back to pray for people if you'd like. Nathan, if you've got some more songs to sing, if you'd like to just stand, we'll sing as we do that.